Welcome back to Between Frequencies, the space where science meets spirit and where we explore what it means to awaken, heal, and live with deeper clarity. Today, I'm joined by Breonna Danielle Rodriguez del Grasso, which is a lovely name,
I think.
a certified grief counselor, two-time Emmy-nominated design leader, and the founder of Hype Mother, a grief lab dedicated to understanding how our systems quietly create and compound grief. Her work sits at the intersection of design, research, and healing with one clear mission: helping people live and die with dignity. For over 2 decades, Breonna has shaped culture at the highest levels, telling stories and creating experiences for some of the world's most recognized brands. But now she's turned her creative lens toward one of the most profound human experiences of all: loss. Through Hype Mother, she's building tools and validating knowledge that help people, caregivers, and institutions reimagine the way we grieve, age, and belong. In this conversation, we'll explore the often unspoken dimensions of grief, the way it hides in our system, in our workplaces, and in the spaces between our identities. We'll talk about how design can become a form of healing, why grief isn't just personal but collective, and how awareness can transform both pain and policy. If you've ever felt that grief is bigger than a single loss, that is something woven into how we live and connect. This episode will speak to you. So take a deep breath, open your heart, and buckle up. Let's get between the frequencies. Hello, Brianna. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. That was stellar. I'm like, I want to listen now. That sounded fantastic.
I am beyond excited to talk to you. I've kind of been stalking you a little bit. I am fascinated by near death experiences. And we were just talking about this before we came on. And you asked me a great question. You said, "Why are you fascinated by this?" And I paused for a second, but really, I think it's because it gives quantitative evidence to something that feels otherworldly and helps us, at least for me, recognize that there's something so much more to what we think there is. So I'm really curious. I want to turn the question back on you. What first drew you to study near death experiences?
Yeah, I think my curiosity is very much like anyone else. I was looking for answers maybe 20, 30 years ago of always studying why are we here and what is our larger purpose. And at the time, I was really able to open myself up to a world of multiple schools of thought and belief. And NDEs came in pretty early in that purview, and I've always spent time listening to other stories. And only recently did I start to notice that there were researchers in this field, and I started to have a bit of a desire to learn more. And personally, as like a storyteller, when I started looking at these stories, I thought I was finding a lot of content that was created online, and I thought it was very helpful, but some of it was kind of concerning to me as well. It could be coming from a place of like my age or my experience, but
Right.
I
That
was
good
watching.
old built in bias, right?
Exactly. But also, as someone who lived in tech, like I could see the algorithm at work and people keeping up to kind of post and get their ideas out there. But I also noticed in the comments that people who were watching these videos were in really tender places. They had experienced loss or they were experiencing anticipatory grief. And I just thought that there was a responsible role that I could play to sort of affirm people in the content that they were watching, but maybe lean into an academic perspective. I'm in the middle of getting my master's right now. The degree is called thanatology, so it's the study of death, grief, and loss. And 2 weeks away from graduating, very excited.
Woo!
Yeah, I just thought, you know what, I think I can talk about it from this kind of perspective, this quantitative perspective. And I just started looking at transcripts and finding themes and posting those themes, not as an answer of exactly what exists, but, I think we are comfortable holding duality, themes of duality. And I thought people could hold on to some of these bigger spiritual questions just with numeric data behind them. And it just might help them move through that grief instead of, letting it stay and become more of like a prolonged grief diagnosis, which that's not good for anybody. So
Right.
that's why I'm here. It's fun. I love it. It's inspiring. It's curious. It's wild, some of the stories, but I enjoy I enjoy holding that space for people. It's why I'm in the field and I love it.
That's awesome. And grief can be so isolating. So I think it's a wonderful, I don't want to say it's a wonderful feeling, but it's nice to know that someone else, I mean, logically, someone else has obviously gone through this. People die all the time. But when you're in the moment, it feels very, very lonely. And being able for someone like me, who's very data driven, very science minded, in the moment, being able to turn to something and say, oh, look, this is something that I can sink my teeth in because it doesn't feel like a cloud I'm trying to read, but it's more like data I can hold on to, feels really, really valuable as well. Um, you had
Absolutely.
a whole other life in tech. I'm very curious. Was there a like a personal experience, or what was it that shifted you from where you were to here?
Well, I think that I I think I left by force of spirit. I feel like I was kicked out, honestly, and not in a bad way. I had an incredible experience. I still talk to a lot of the people I worked with, and I'm a hype mother to all of them, very much so. But I just wanted to get more done, and I was frustrated with the bureaucracy. I am a creative. I am a systems thinker, and a neurodivergent brain. I don't want to have to validate one idea through 10 meetings of
Girl,
bureaucracy
I hear
that
you.
takes 8 hours for
Oh my
sign off.
gosh.
It's not a good use of my time. It's not a good use of my talent. Like, and when you look at what I'm just starting to do with this content, like you can kind of see where someone like me would just get itchy. And I think I was 43 at the time and or 42 at the time and turned 43 last year. And I'll be 44 in a couple of weeks. So age, all the numbers, they just start to blur together. But I just kind of really felt like it was time. It was time to give myself some space to study something I loved. I had experienced loss myself. I had seen the tools that were in this arena and they were poor, and people are surprised when they have to navigate the systems of hospice and palliative care and taking care of their parents and becoming a caregiver. And I thought, bare minimum, as a designer, I can learn about this, study it with integrity, and design something that's really meaningful. And then luckily, I got in the program and fell in love with so many aspects of the field. And I'm building towards all the things that I have heart for. So,
Yeah. Just to add to what you're saying, I have this idea for a study floating around in my head a little bit. And it kind of comes to the intersection of a couple different things, including becoming caregivers for our parents. There has been studies released recently connecting late diagnosis of autism in women to high masking capacity, and that the ability to mask at a high capacity tends to drop between the ages of like 38 and 45, right? And typically that's associated with children becoming old enough to care for themselves and stuff like that. And then the weight of carrying the mass drops. That's also very closely related to the common age of awakening for women. And so I'm very, very curious. And I kind of have thoughts about creating some sort of study around this, about the idea of the archetype of the matriarch, right? So you raised your children and you have to wear the mask in order to put them first, right? As they age out, the mask drops and you become the caregiver for your parents. So then you have to flip the tables and you have to kind of come from a different side on that, right? You can't raise your parents or usher your parents towards death the same way that you ushered your children's towards life. And so I think dropping the mask becomes spiritually necessary because as women, we're the carrier of the emotion, right? So I think that's part of the process, is to help us transmute the energy of death, the energy of life, all this stuff. But because we live in a society that's very busy, now we have this drop down of put your mask on, just get through your day, that sort of stuff. So I think there's some kind of intersection there that I'm very excited about. I haven't quite fleshed it all out yet, but I think something to think about. And I really think there's a connection to the idea of becoming the caregiver that feels important to that.
yeah, I could go on a huge uh, I want to know when you do this. Like, help, call me, like, let me, because when I just also thought of is now is in that age range, we are also seeing women facing a lot of reproductive challenges with their bodies. And so this is very curious where the endometriosis, the fibroids, um, you talked about how the role of a woman kind of sort of while being the parent is storing so much within
Yes.
them and alchemizing that and in real time. And a
Yes.
lot of women today are doing the incredible work of breaking generational cycles. And so where does that emotion go? Where does it store in the body? How is it related to any comorbidities? How is that expanded across a variety of different like ethnic groups and social economical groups? I think it could be very fascinating to see the physical space that that transition takes in the body and how we might be able to understand ourselves differently.
Yes. And I
I have chills. I love this. I have chills.
and I think menopause is part of that,
Oh yeah.
because we are the only species, I believe, on the planet that goes through menopause. What is the purpose of menstruation? Is to bring forward life. When it's time to usher forward death and take care of our parents, typically most people are going through menopause around that time, and making you, like, to me, literally that's the transition, that's the bridge right there, where you're going from creating to ushering out this life experience. I mean, all of that seems so connected and so intertwined. And you're right, we could talk about this for hours.
Oh, I know. And I'm also just thinking of my own parents, and Lord knows I cannot usher them into their next phase of life being the first daughter energy that I started with because they're hard-headed and I'm
Right.
not going to have the bandwidth to talk cute sentences.
Right.
So
Exactly.
being the
Exactly.
crone is going to make this all a successful journey. So yeah,
Yes.
you have something. I think you have something.
I think so.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so I'm very curious. So how long now have you been researching NDEs specifically? And then what's changed most in your personal understanding from where you started to where you find yourself today with that specific experience?
Well, I think in terms of being a scientist about it, I would only allow myself to claim the last year in terms of really taking a full-on approach, but to sort of collecting transcripts and quantifying them into themes. Before then, I was just really busy doing full-time job stuff. But while I was there, I think my data is, and the story and the way I'm able to share the data is sits on the shoulders of decades of paying attention to these stories and genuinely watching hours of this content, journaling, thinking about it, reading related research on other fields and like in quantum physics and just and asking a lot of just interesting questions to folks who are mentors in the hospice space and the grief space. And so I would say in the last year, though, that's when I've finally had the space to put all of that observation into place. And I think what kind of sparked the idea was watching a video and I heard someone mention columns. And I go, that's like the third time I've heard someone say they've seen columns. I wonder how many times these, it must be a column thing, or there must be a place with columns. And I think that kind of started to kick me off
So
into the
interesting. Seeing the
direction there.
commonality or the echo. I love it.
Yeah, but you don't really get there without, without the time and the thought and reading the books.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's my journey.
And then, so from when you started out going after this, I mean, it wasn't like you were completely skeptical, right? You had some understanding of it. Has your understanding of the near death experience and the death experience itself evolved in the last year? Or do you feel like you find yourself pretty much where you were before, but with more evidence?
A little of both. A little yes and. I think that it's exciting that nothing has made me go, okay, this is nonsense, you know? I think I one thing I didn't anticipate in creating this data, and I've been sharing it for your listeners. I've just been sharing it on TikTok because, like I said, I'm finishing a master's program and I have a very good GPA. I would like to finish it strong. But it's been really fascinating just sharing it and
I want to
I
pause right here and just say something about that. All right.
what?
Because as a scientist, friend, when you're doing a study, after you do the study, what comes next? Peer review. Who are your peers? TikTok is your peer, right? So it's going to be easier for you to get peer reviewed evidence, like commentary on what you're putting out there for support or denial on TikTok, than it's going to be when you submit it for publication. Because I mean, as someone in the same type of field you've been in, I understand that feeling of I have such great stuff and nobody wants to read it, like it's very frustrating. But TikTok really is, they are your peers, they are our peers, and it's incredibly valuable. So I just don't want you I think it's great that you put it out there. I wouldn't have found you otherwise. So I just want to say that. But I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I had to say that because it's such a great valuable resource of information and data. And if you can look at it through that point of view, yes, there's a lot of crap on there, but there's a lot of really good stuff on there.
There
I've learned
is.
so much.
There is. And I think that's the part of my understanding that's changed is there's the difference between transcribing and seeing patterns and then having, you know, hundreds and hundreds of people in your comments say, this is exactly what happened to me. I made a post of that about a really common theme of people who have experienced near-death experiences. They can't be around electricity. And not only were people shocked about it, but I had to make a whole other post that pulled up other different pieces of research and data that was out there. And again, we're talking about like thousands of people who are just like, that is me. That explains my life. I didn't realize that. And so it's given me quite a bit of pause because call it my Saturn placements, if you will, or my crazy crowded eighth house. But I just want to be responsible, and so it's definitely given me this sense of slowing down, looking at the comments, reading their stories, thanking people for sharing them, taking the opportunity to ask more questions. And it also kind of really highlights how this audience has been scared to talk about what they've experienced and they don't know who they can share it with. Sometimes in the comments, it's their first time telling the story, and it is incredible to see that platform like dive on top of that comment
Yes.
and bomb it with heart after heart and thank you and I love this and emojis. Sometimes I feel like I'm holding something that I don't understand.
Right. That's the
But
bright side. Right. So that to me, that's how community should feel, that you should feel safe to be authentic and find support in your community, regardless if I can say I understand your experience or not. I can support you either way, right?
yeah,
And I think that what social media has great potential is to provide that in a time when we feel very divided,
yeah,
right? It has such a dark side to it, obviously, but this is the part that's so wonderful is the coming together and the feeling of you're not alone. The whole reason I started putting my Schumann videos out there was the same thing. I'm like, well, if I'm feeling this, somebody else has got to be feeling this. I mean, I'm a scientist and I'm like, there's no way I'm the only one. I look at the data. So it can be very helpful. And I'm really glad that you're putting that out there and giving people not just the space to learn about it, but the people who have experience to feel like, oh, it's okay. I'm not alone. Um,
absolutely.
and that kind of brings me right into my next question. What does your actual research process look like? So you're watching videos, reading transcriptions. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so right now I am actually building a new tool to help me move a little bit faster, but I am finding videos that are readily online. I have a set of metrics that I don't know if I should call them metrics, but I have a set of themes that I'm looking for across each one of the videos. I try to pay attention to the storytellers themselves and making sure I have as best of a diverse set of folks talking about not only their backgrounds, especially when it comes to like law enforcement and military, because these I think can be sometimes quite traumatic in the NDE experience, especially if
Right.
they've like, had combat exposure. But then I'm also trying to grab like a diversification in terms of the near-death experiences, making sure I have accident victims and people. Some I've had made sure that a couple weeks ago I was like murder. We only have two murder stories. Like, how do I make sure? And I do that because it allows me to recall and continue to dive into other stories and research about neural patterns in the brain and making sure when in comments people are like, this just feels like a DMT trip. And I'm
Right.
like, well, yes, however, the stories that they're talking about and the experience they explain after the NDE, we don't have data to explain that behavior change to such a drastic level. We have very few things that do that. So, like, my research is really, it's as simple as taking transcripts and breaking them across a consistent number of themes. And right now, I'm working with a developer in Germany to strengthen that tool because I'm still only dealing with English speaking NDE stories. And
Wow. So that
that
really does cut it down. I mean, that's huge. If you could incorporate a language model of some kind to do translation for you, like that would be huge.
It would be incredible. And right now, I'm using an LLM to help me like grab themes across the transcripts to make sure I'm catching them and their intentions accurately because sometimes, for instance, someone will say, I saw nothing. It was just clear, it was black and velvety. I felt nothing. But then later on in the transcript, they'll say, I felt incredible peace. And so it's like, okay, like,
Right.
how, and so it's nothing that you can really hand over to an AI generator and be like, hey, clean sentences. It's
Right.
still
Yeah.
quite
Well, that really
hands-on.
brings up a point about that because it's all perspective too, right? Because if they say I didn't feel anything, it could simply be that they equate I don't feel anything with the absence of chaos, right? If they've lived a chaotic life, the peace just feels like nothing, right?
Or if they just got in an accident, sometimes I
Right.
didn't feel anything means I left the body and I didn't feel any pain.
Right.
And
There's
so
so
it's
many variables. Oh my gosh.
absolutely. And so this tool that he's helping me build, it should be really exciting. And yet I do love the idea of maintaining the level of time and closeness to the data so that I can be as hands-on with it as possible. I think there are little elements of like ethnography in here too. And I still feel like slightly, if I can be honest, imposter syndrome-y, if that makes sense. It's funny because I worked at I worked at Google, I worked at Sesame Street. Like these are like 15 years of my life where no decision got made without data and research. And
Right.
yet I always work with like a research team. And now here I am. The developer called me a death scientist, and I loved that. And so
Yeah.
now I'm like, whew, do I have to take another qual class? Like I think I do. I want to feel as confident about this as I do picking my hex values. So we're putting it all on. We're trying it all on for size, but as ethically as possible. Like none of it's monetized. These aren't interviews that I like conducted one-on-one, and so I'm not like making any money off of it. And
Yeah. Well, that
that
reminds me, I wanted to ask you, where are you getting the transcripts? Like that seems like a pretty specialized thing. I don't imagine you can just call up Google and say, "Hey, you know." So where do you find these?
they're actually still available unrelated to Google. We have YouTube, and
Oh,
so they're all on YouTube. So it's
really?
very.
Wow. Okay.
But these stories are they're across like YouTube. Some were on Vimeo. Some were like um, more like kind of like documentary style. But I stuck to the YouTube ones after a while because they were more consistent and more validated by
Hmm.
the interviewers themselves. And what I'm trying to do is find a way to um, allow this for me to apply for some grants earlier next year. And then I can do another round of studies like on one-on-one with folks. And I think what I'm excited about is spending this time collecting feedback from people and looking at these transcripts. I'm able to go, okay, but what are we not learning and what do we still want to know and what's still not clear and what feels debatable, and see if I can interrogate the subject from a different angle.
Hmm.
But I'm just haven't arrived to it. But I think that's where that's where I'm hoping I'll hit a new stride of impact there. So, but yeah, these are available. I don't think I did any rocket science here. Like it's all
Well,
YouTube.
I still think it's amazing. I want to ask you some of the things, the themes and things that you've noticed. What in your personal opinion, right? So, what are some of the most striking or consistent themes across NDE accounts that stick with you? Like the thing that you heard and you thought, "Wow, that's crazy," and then it repeats and repeats and repeats. Like it really strikes you. I'm very, very curious about that.
Well, I guess a couple of things. I think the human in me was just really happy to hear everyone essentially, I don't say everyone, but I would say a majority of people have a positive experience. And I felt better. I felt my shoulders come down when people said I didn't feel the pain, that I
Yeah.
left my body before it happened. I've heard horrible stories, awful stories of people who were victims of crime and very sexual related traumas, and talking about how they left their body and how an angel was with them.
Yeah.
And it just, I don't know how or why my heart needed to hear that, but those kind of always stayed with me. And I think one of my favorite things is it's actually comes from hospice nurses because they have seen things.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
so, a lot of one of the big things I look for is like, how can this story be? How did this person validate their experience? And a lot of people will explain hearing or witnessing events that their body was not physically in the room for. Like maybe the doctor at the hospital had another conversation with the nurse, but they were on 3 floors below them and at the other side
Right.
of the hospital wing. And so they're able to recall that conversation. And the medical professionals are like, how did you know that? Like the nurses in comments and even in their own like books that they've published, like talking about this, I'm like, that's magic. That's very cool.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
so those to me, those I always get a giggle out of those stories, but ultimately, I think it was the pain for some reason. I think that just stuck
Well, I
with me.
think that's really comforting, right? I mean,
Yeah,
we were kind of talking about this before we started recording is um for me personally, my view on death is, I'm not in a hurry. I don't want to die. I like my life. I'm very much
right,
enjoying it.
right.
However, I'm also not afraid to die. I think I am very afraid of pain. I don't want to be in pain. I don't, like nobody that I know wants to be in pain, right? But the idea of moving from one plane to another, I've heard so many spiritual teachers, experiencers, my own personal experiences, for me to feel comfortable in the idea that it's just a transition. It's like waking up from a dream, crossing from one room to another. One of the favorite things I ever heard about an NDE was in that documentary I told you about called Surviving Death. And there's this woman who was an ER doctor who died kayaking. And someone asked her, what did it feel like? And she said, I never felt dead. She said, I felt alive and then I felt more alive. She said the colors
Oh,
were brighter and bigger and things I could taste the sweetness in the air and I felt I could hear the song of the plants. She's like, it's not like I was dead. I was just more alive, you know? And for me, that was incredibly comforting because it goes along with what I believe spiritually, energetically, all these things. And logically, the human body is pretty freaking limited in our ability to experience things. I mean, if you just think about the light spectrum, it
Yeah,
our perception of the light spectrum is itty bitty teeny tiny compared to how much is out there. And so logically for me as a scientist, I cannot discount that
yeah,
my physical vessel is unable to process the information of something that is moving at a frequency too fast for it to process. You know what I mean? And so
absolutely.
these near death experiences for me, learning that people don't feel the pain and that they feel more alive and that it's beautiful and all this stuff, that's the value in what you're studying for me, is because death is part of life. It can't be avoided. Everybody's going to die at some point. And I think if you can take away the fear behind the death, you can more fully live your life.
Absolutely. And to that point, like even especially this last year, things have just changed so much in like the country, and it's really shown me my own personal attachments.
Oh,
And so even the
absolutely.
concept of like, I didn't want to feel pain, I got to go, well, what is that about? Well, let's talk about that. Like, what is that about, given that the things that you're describing and believe in, I'm a subscriber of as well. And so it allows me to think, well, how many things am I avoiding in life because I don't want to feel pain?
Right,
And then
exactly.
what is my relationship to pain and what is my relationship to my body? And how might I have a different relationship so that I can move forward and not hold myself back? So it's very interesting when we talk about it, and even hearing you replay it, and I go, "Ooh, I see some work for me." And
I love that. That's such a fun feeling. That's one of my favorite feelings as a scientist, is when I get the idea for a study, you know, even if it's just a little tiny one, I'm like, ooh, I like it. You know, it's like a little delicious thing. Which brings me perfectly, you know, for all of our listeners, I gave Brianna a list of questions and I said at the beginning, this is just an outline. We don't have to follow this. And literally our whole conversation very organically is leading us right through this list. So takes me literally to the right next question. Um, when you're looking at these near death experiences from the science perspective, how does science attempt to explain these perceptions that people have?
yeah, I think that the right people are starting to come inside the house, so
Right.
to speak. I read like a really scathing review of it was like a lit review, and I think the approach was trying to frame NDEs as like part hallucination, and it was the way in which the discussion it automatically invalidated the idea of some. I should pull it up and send it to you. But it kind of in the field of science, they kind of don't validate what you can't see and what you can't
Right.
observe. And so, therefore, you're not even starting the study from the most grounded place of what's possible. Right now, there's some like neurological interests that kind of pays attention to like oxygen levels and seeing, measuring when they drop in the brain. I think they are looking at the releases of DMT at certain times of like extreme stress. But what's really interesting is that when they think about how hallucination brain activity performs in the brain, or what is happening when you're having that sort of like release of a DMT, especially in like a maybe a wakeful state after trauma, it doesn't map to the brain the same way that people are recalling their NDE experiences. Like they show up on two different sides. So right now, it does feel like a lot of science is looking at it from a neurological perspective, not as like I'm taking the approach of like a more qualitative storytelling, and just imagining, okay, well maybe this is true. What would that mean?
Right.
But there are people who are like saying, no, I think there's something here, and I think the thing about this research is that science has to get more interdisciplinary maybe perhaps to find a little bit more answers. And I'm starting to see that in some of the research that's coming out.
Yeah,
And
more
so look,
interdisciplinary and more open-minded, I think is
yeah,
no. I mean, when there's a contradiction in science, so the way I was taught in school is you kind of have to look at it like a jury, right? You're presented with information and then you weigh the facts and you as a jury, your group of peers, you make a choice. When there are conflicting facts, then you have to have something else to add credence to one side or the other, which is the form of testimony, right? This is personal experience that comes forward to validate the data that we're given. The problem with current science is they are unwilling to accept personal testimony when it comes to things like this because it's in uncharted territory. And so it
right,
makes everyone uncomfortable when they start talking about it because suddenly they may not have an explanation for it.
right.
Do you see what I'm saying? And it just
Uh-huh.
feels like this cyclical thing of, okay, but you have testimony to back this up, but you're unwilling to listen to the testimony, so you can't back it. Like it's this, it just feels like the science fighting with itself a lot.
Yeah, and I think though, like it's interesting because I research in science is often pointing towards proving out a fact, like
Right.
trying to establish the facts in which we can operate within the world, understanding that they may change over time. And yet there's some areas where um, maybe the goal shouldn't be to prove out a fact.
Right. It
Maybe
shouldn't
the
be a diagnosis of exclusion, right?
Exactly. Maybe we're trying to open the door. And maybe we're trying to understand that we have a space in the world that needs more investigation, that we don't have language for yet, that we
Right.
don't have a way of validation that services these questions in a way that do larger senses of justice for us. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say like a lot of folks are starting to interrogate the space, and I can imagine that within the next like 10 to 15 years, we will have a much more, I guess, a more common language around them. I think enough researchers are starting to like come and point at things and go, "Hey, also, I think we're getting a lot more women in there." And they're going, "Hey, what is this?
Yes.
I don't think so." So
Yes.
it makes
Yes.
a difference
Yes.
who's in the
Yes. It
room.
does. It makes a huge difference. Um, Nothing against male scientists, but the female scientists that I have personally worked with have been far more receptive to thinking outside the box. And I don't have any evidence to point to that's man or woman or female or masculine, but I, from personal experience, can tell you that all the scientists, PhDs, and doctors I worked with, it was always the females who were like, "Oh, that's interesting. Let's talk about that, or let's think about that."
I will say that, especially in my last role, where you have to write an entire 12-page lit review in order to justify any design decision you make. I did happen to work with a lot of men who they understood me in a way that I hadn't been able to have in like previous discussions. It's like if I was able to put together even a 5-page lit review, not 11, but in their mind they go, "Oh wait, hold on, I'm familiar with this.
Right.
My mom used to do this in the kitchen where she was like whipping up random things and it made sense. Okay, let me follow you." And then you sort of like reintroduce their super skills of play versus having to have all the answers constantly, which is another social construct for them. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you can get the right environment where everyone's allowed to bring like their most divine self through both of those roles, you really can get a lot of steam, a lot of innovation going.
Well, that's
And
wholeness, isn't it? That's
it's
two sides of a
wholeness.
coin. That's wholeness. Just like with medicine, it has to be a balance between your physical treatment and your metaphysical treatment. It's not just about dysfunction in the cell. The dysfunction in the cell started somewhere. It started with energy, right? So we have to treat the whole picture. And I love what you're saying about bringing in the more playful side and making things, bringing a little levity to something that feels very heavy, right? It helps to make it easier to process, I think.
I'm gonna say heavy
Heavy?
all week. I love that.
Yeah, I invent
Little
new words
levity
all
to
the
the
time.
heavity. It was great.
So I want to ask you about some of the things because you have a lot of percentages in your work. So I would love for you to share some of the percentages that come up in your research, the things that you have found that people tend to find the most interesting.
Well, the electricity thing, that was hilarious to me. And
Well, share that with everybody because I don't think I recorded that.
yeah, no, so in near-death experiences, a lot of people who survive them, they tend to have very big sensitivity to electronic devices. And if you hop in any one of my comments, you can see people talking about turning off entire grids inside of a mall, blowing up microwaves when they have like emotional responses, terrible times with watches. They can't wear watches. Their cell phones are constantly breaking on them. And so, from a percentage perspective, I have to look it back up. I think it was like maybe like 20, like a 28 number. But they were like, no, that's me. And I'm like, maybe my data set isn't large enough. I had to keep expanding
It's
because a
really
lot of
interesting.
people keep
That's
saying I have problems with electronics. And the fascinating thing that I heard from that was there were people whose mothers had near-death experiences while they were pregnant. So the person did not experience them themselves, and they have problems with electronics.
wow, that's a whole nother level. That's
I
really interesting.
I don't know how to begin to process it.
So that
So,
even could dovetail into something else, just to put another feather in your back pocket here. So, as someone who's very energetically sensitive, obviously, I also cannot wear a watch. I have burnt out two Apple watches. And the second one I took back to Apple and I said, now listen, what is up with this? Now, the first time it happened, they told me, oh, there was a recall on the watch. The battery will swell and it'll have, okay, fine. So I got a second, different generation watch. The battery swelled up and popped out of the bag. And when I took it back, the guy at Apple looked at me and he goes, what did you do to it? And I go, I didn't do anything to it. He goes, well, you had to have done something. This doesn't just happen. I'm like, well, brother, it's happened twice. So, and my car, the electronics in my car are always fritzing on me, constantly doing weird stuff. My clock will reset itself constantly. So it makes me curious talking about the people who've had these NDEs and have this electrical interference as someone who's sensitive to energy. I wonder what mechanism it is. Is it a frequency shift in the human body vessel, right? Is it
I
a
think
frequency
so.
shift in all the cells that makes you more on a resonant scale with electronics? You know, like it's so much that could come. There's so much that could come from that.
You guys can't see me nodding my head, but I am nodding my head. In fact, I pulled up a piece of research on this one post intentionally to help folks who are experiencing this electronic disturbance, to see that scientists have seen the phenomena, and they talk about the electromagnetic field that comes from the heart. And I
Right.
feel like one of the other consistent things that goes along with that piece of data is people talking about how they are deeply changed in profound ways in which they have gifts of like healing faster than they could before the incident, of clairvoyance and extra intelligence and being able to see things and know things before they happen. Like they are very much altered. And I know that if every thought creates a frequency, if you are in the space of seeing and holding large frameworks of potential time, that also has to have a frequency within itself. And for your body to then interact and support that and not collapse in on itself, the mathematics just makes sense that you yourself must be operating in a completely new frequency for yourself.
Yes.
So from an interdisciplinary approach, it's available. The data is available and it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I interrupted you. So give us some percentages of some of the coolest or most interesting things that you've come across. This is
Okay.
what happens though in inspired conversation for everybody who's listening. This is what it feels like when you are resonating loudly with something and a subject and a person. You can go off and talk for hours on something and come all the way back and be like, "Wait, what?" You know?
Wait, where did we go? Well, I mentioned earlier to you, I think in the previous conversation, or was it now, one of the things that I was a thread I pulled on when before I had started the study, I noticed people talking about columns.
Right.
And it just it randomly occurred to me. It was like, wow, that's like the third person I heard talking about columns when they went to the other side. So one of the recent things that I looked at is like, well, how many people are seeing these rooms and these columns? It was 19.3% of people. They enter a big room with columns, with halls, and these are seem to be like decision making places or
Okay.
briefing
Like a
places.
courthouse
Not a courthouse because they don't describe it as such, but
or like a
but I
hall
guess
of records, maybe?
like a place for people to just make decisions. It
Okay.
seems to
I'm
be
literally picturing like the Senate in Rome, like where people go in and have debate. Like that's the picture in my head with the columns, but I
I'm
see what
I'm
you're saying.
I'm thinking more of like a really nice resort.
Okay. Okay.
So I think there's because the way that if I can remember some things off the cuff, like people were also outside and then they saw columns, and so there must have been
Okay.
like indoor
Like a
outdoor kind of
paradise.
like a paradise. Oh, perfect. So yeah, that was pretty interesting. And then at least about 43.5% of people, they describe the experience to be very abstract. We're talking like huge bright colors interacting with like just like an energy being. Like they'll see someone that's made of light, is what they'll describe, and they'll talk about knowing what they're taught. They don't have a vocal communication, and it's more of a knowing in the
Hmm.
mind of like what they're talking about. I thought that was interesting. And people, we talked about this earlier, like seeing outdoors and trees and stuff. They describe, I have like here 19.2% see like the terrestrial stuff that we're familiar with, like nature and water, but they'll describe the water as being alive. Like the rip, like things where we just barely interact with them now, like, oh, hi, tree, thanks for the shade, let me give you a
Right.
hug today. But no, like you kind of have this sense that they are living beings, and you can interact with them in a way, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then just in going on the stats of things that people see, there's another 15% that talked about just being in a celestial realm of sorts where they're like floating through. They can kind of see, some people see Earth at like a really small glimpse. They're like zoomed away. They'll spend time like in a cosmos of sorts. They'll see like planets, and they can see I've seen them say stars. I don't know what to call it. Like this you ever see those like NASA images where it's like a
Yeah.
huge gas
Like a nebula,
cluster?
right?
Yeah, but they'll describe themselves as like themselves, but not in this physical body either.
Right.
And so I think I think I like actually that that one little study in particular because the numbers are quite chunky if you think about it. I'm not having like two people over here being like, "Oh, I saw the moon," but like it does seem to be like there are these themes in which people consistently find that they're gathering information. Almost everyone has a life review. Now, I'm trying to get this number a little bit more quantified because I think the way everyone's describing it is quite different. And so,
That's what I
like,
was just going to ask you, right? Because it
yeah,
seems to be, you know, I want to ask you, especially with the life review, do you find or have you thought about expectation playing into it? Like, for example, I heard a theory from, I forget where I heard it, but I heard a theory from someone that said, when you die, you have the experience you expect because otherwise you wouldn't necessarily recognize that you're dead. So, by conjecture, that means if you expect to go to hell, then you have to have some sort of hellish experience before you recognize you're dead and you can move on. But they also said that the minute you recognize what's happening, it pulls you out of it, right? So, I'm curious if that's come up as well.
I don't feel it's hard to tell from the data why people experience that, right? Like,
Hmm.
and I think this is why I'm very interested in finding voices from tangential experts,
Hmm.
such as yourself, like those who are working in like a spiritual realm, whether it's shamans or religious leaders or mediums to like start collecting in some sort of like peripheral data to have a conversation about this, because there are people who come from, say, very structured religious backgrounds, very Christian backgrounds, and they go to the other side and they don't experience anything that is related to what they knew. In fact, they have an entirely other experience that
Oh, that's
makes
very
them walk away
interesting.
from their religion. And yet there are people who have no Christian background, and they will see Christ in in their near death experience. And then everyone sees. I'm so scared to do this. Like, well, what does Jesus look like to
Right.
everyone? Because that is that is a debate that people are passionate about in my
That
company.
is. I
Um,
think that's too one of those things that's a worldview thing. Like, I
it can,
think the way you look through your eyes is the way he's going to look. You know, I think that's because it's energy, right? If
yeah,
we look at these beings, these ascended masters like Jesus, Buddha, all these people, there really is. It's more about the energy of the being and not the physical being himself. You know, Jesus Christ or Jeshua, or whatever his name was. I don't claim to know enough about it, but that physical being was again just a small fragment of something much larger. And once the physical being has passed from existence, it's gone, right? But the larger piece is still there. But I
absolutely.
think because we have puny little human brains that need lots of little constructs, that we look at these things through our puny little human brain, you know, to help us understand what we're looking at. Otherwise, your brain is looking at this big nebulous piece of energy going, what in the hell am I looking at? Right. Like it's just something
Absolutely.
like that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And but the thing that I get really excited about, which I don't think is as easy to structure, is the consistent message of love that nearly everyone walks away with. And love in this day and age, on this planet, in these shoes, is not something that is like taught or manufactured very easily. There
Right.
are so many things that are reinforcing us to think of ourselves first, protect ourselves from others, make communities separate. Like there's so much that are actually not only dividing us from each other, but dividing us from our own divinity, that for an entire population to come back from that experience and have the single mindset of what love is, the experience of it, the peace of it, what it truly feels like to embody it, we don't have an answer for that. And so it almost then becomes a loving experience in the differences of like, hey, look, I'm gonna tell this message however you can get it. However, whatever the ascendant master is,
Right.
that is the vehicle. If you have none, we'll invent a new one.
Right. The
If you
path of
don't need
least resistance, right? The
the
thing you
path,
have the least resistance to.
yeah, absolutely. And so I think that I always am just amazed that that is the most consistent thing that comes back from people. And it can be really hard for them to integrate back into the world after that, especially folks who come from like maybe very religious communities, or folks who they maybe they come back and they're very alone in their life and they don't have a community. How do you tell the doctor, yeah, I heard you three
Right.
floors down. It's a big mindset shift. It's an energetic shift. It's a heart shift. And so these are quite brave people in a really unique way, the ones that are telling their stories, because it's not easy, and the world doesn't reinforce the message that they have. And that level of operating in that love frequency it's the challenge and the goal. And it's taught me a lot. It's taught me so much, and I'm so grateful for them.
Yeah, I can see that. And I kind of want to bring this into the idea of grief, right?
Yeah.
So when we learn, from my perspective, one of the powers of learning about near death experiences can make it, I don't want to say easier, but a little bit easier to process the idea of grief. If you can understand that the person that you loved is not disappeared off of existence, and there is a way to communicate and reach them while we may grieve their physical existence. I think it gives us something to work towards. And I would like to know, like, with your grief lab and the things you're working on, how are you bringing these things together?
Yeah, I think, well, the NDE experience is probably my first sort of foray into addressing grief head on as I perceive it. Because I do see a lot of people coming to this content from a place in which they are experiencing grief, whether it's death related or non-death related loss, right? And I think that's why I love providing the quantitative data because it allows us to have like a comfort chair to put our hand on and kind of navigate through in that day. Um, but I think it's so many things. When you start studying grief, grief becomes far more complicated very quickly depending on who that person was to you. So let's say that I lost someone that I considered to be like a mother to me, and they passed away. Um, and let's add another crazy spin on it. They passed away in a car that I was driving, right? So maybe
Right.
I feel responsible. Um, and for the record, my mom's awesome. So she's not anyway, but so then in that grief experience, you have multiple things that you might be curious about, and where an NDE experience will give you some education. You might be able to learn that there isn't really judgment from these stories, and that forgiveness comes like blinking, like it's not a thing to according to these stories. You might then also have to realize the person that you lost because they had that mother role. Maybe you're mourning the mother you never had. So then you have to kind of undo that knot as well. And so I like actually being mindful of all the hidden things, the secret things, the things that maybe we don't feel comfortable telling our pastor or telling our friend because they come with shame, they come with fear, and I think that that to me is interesting. Being able to help people have a safe space to ask the most vulnerable question that is blocking their ability to show up in the world the way that they would like to through this content is what I feel is so special. And it's such a ripe opportunity to just hold someone, hold their hand and be like, it's probably okay. And in fact, it's probably important you forgive yourself. And that's why I can't wait to like start bringing in some of those tangential
Yeah.
voices. My mentor is one of my mentors. I have so many. I'm so lucky. One of my mentors is she was a head nurse at a hospital for a very long time, did hospice care, but is now like a uh, not even a Reiki practitioner. I don't even know how to describe what Carol does. She's just amazing. But she talks about this quite a bit about helping how in her career how she's helped people kind of transition um, into the beyond the veil and the things that they hold on to. The tiny thoughts, the tiny shames. And she's like, it's important work. It's important work to help people transition without these things because on the other side, um, that forgiven. These things are forgiven. These things are more lessons. You get to reflect on them. Did you like that? Did you not like that? Do you want to try it again? Do you want to come at it from a different angle? And then you have like that one beautiful book. I think it's called the little sun and the soul in the sun, or the little soul in the sun. I'll have to look this up and send it to you. It's the cutest children's book, but it talks about these two angels who are these two little small souls who are like, I really want to come down and I want to feel what it's like to be important. The other one goes, okay, well then I'll do something really bad so that you can feel the feeling of being important, and it would be so awesome. And they're so excited
Right.
to hold that role for each other. Um, and I think I'm going on a tangent, but trying to rewind it back a little bit. But yeah, when it comes to grief, like it's complicated, and it's not. We do a huge disservice to ourselves when we associate it only with death, because in death, in our relationships, are real neural pathways that our brain made to each other so that we might move on. And some of those neural pathways might have been maladaptive behaviors that allowed us to heal from other wounds that we created. They also might illuminate ways and behaviors in which we are maybe too hard on ourselves. We are too we're living in a limited way, and that's I don't mean to be disrespectful about this, but there is something in grief for all of us in
Right.
that way. And there it's a dark cave and you don't always get a big bright candle, but if you can muster your way into that cave with that light, there is something in here for you. But I say that with a lot of reverence for sometimes grief is just sometimes that's just it's too much. Some people just went through too much and it
I
just ain't
agree.
right.
I agree.
Just ain't
And
right.
I agree. And it's very frustrating when I have someone who's been through a lot and they ask me, why? Why have I been through so much? And I don't have a good answer for that. I don't feel like it's for us to understand. I think our job is to come here and play out our free will. And I do believe that grief is a transformative process,
Hmm.
that it helps to re empower you and remember who you are and reconnect to a deeper piece of what you are grieving. But I think it's so big and scary and has such big, ugly teeth that people are afraid to deal with it, you know?
With good reason, because we are constantly experiencing events that are grief events. Like I get into this with my other work, which I won't say too much about. Surprise, find me later. But it really is like we talked about earlier, me taking 10 meetings to just get one decision made. And the level of eye rolls and second guessing just the experience and stuff like those are grief events. You know what I mean? When you're in a social environment and you cannot discuss something and you can't have it validated because of politics, well, your hypothalamus, your insula, your anterior cortex, like they're old. They're very, very
Yeah.
old. They're like 300 million years of evolutionary like social behavior, and so we are constantly experiencing grief constantly. And so, yeah, with good reason. Sometimes the teeth are too big. We need a nap, a
Yeah. A
joint, a
snack.
prayer, something like to go through it. So
Yeah.
I hear it.
All right. Well, that's really, really interesting. The last question I want to ask you is out of all of the near-death experiences that you've reviewed, is there one that stood out to you that really, really hit home for you or changed a perspective or did something profound for you?
Um, Absolutely. I mean, they all did. They all absolutely have. Yeah, and I actually spent time with her a year ago before I even started all of this, and she had a really compelling story, where she explained having a reaction to medicine that left her skin severely burned, and she was in a coma. And when she told me her story, it was I had seen it on TikTok, and then I had reached out to her to just learn more and it was just stunning, honestly. Like the way that she was able to experience spirituality outside of the context of Christianity, and then come back into the world both a different woman and a more empowered woman was it was so inspiring to me. And she explains while she was in her coma, she went to see a gender reveal party. It was like 30 minutes away or something. And so when she woke up, I think those around her were stunned that she was able to recall the details of what happened at
Wow.
the party. But she describes it on her TikTok feed. I can actually look up the name right now. And the way that she just um, I just think that the way that she moved forward afterwards, which is what I was talking about earlier, how these people can have such profound experiences and the community around them are like, what is that? What do you mean there's no like God or Jesus or the way? And her name is the Kalia Sage on
Okay.
TikTok. I'll send that over to you if you had to end up tagging it.
Yeah, that's
But she
awesome.
just, her story for me, it was just like, wow. And she came back with gifts. She talked about the electronics and stuff, um, and that was just really stunning to me. And yeah, I think from there, me personally and how I might have been changed was it made it real. It made it from something you'd seen online or something you'd read in the book, and then all of a sudden, like it was a very real person. And it also made me I've since like kept up with her and talking now. We're friends and we text and stuff, and I'm cheering her on through her own grad school experience in natural medicine. She's a rock star, just such a stunning rock star. But I think that it just really reminds me that just because you've had the near-death experience, and I see people talk about this in my comments of, wow, all that peace, that must be nice. It doesn't mean when you come back it's going to be easy.
Right.
Integrating is hard, hard work. And so, the thing that I've been thinking about lately is how or why do my nerdy web digital design product experiences, like, why am I meeting these people? What do they need? And well, I have ADHD, so spirit, whatever you want to make, let's get this going because in 2 years, I'm sure I'm going to see something else, and I want to chase that and build that or study that. So, yeah, that story sticks with me just because, for multiple reasons, but it's a story of alchemy. It's a story of like of the bravery that I think people have after these experiences. It's incredibly difficult, especially in America, especially in Christian communities, to come back and say, I saw something other than God and it was real.
Yeah.
Um, and it makes it less of a popcorn phenomena like people might experience when they're
Mhm.
watching it on TikTok and stuff. And it makes me think about those folks. And so I don't know what it is. I don't know why it is, but I believe that there's something that I'm going to have to build for those folks or do for those folks because I think they need more support. And I don't know if they're going to get it from the
Well,
Western community
right. Well,
anytime
I
soon.
couldn't agree with you more. I think there's a lot of support that needs to come out, and I'm
Yeah,
really glad that you're doing this. And I very much am looking forward to the future because I know you and I are going to work on something.
I'm here
There's
for
too
it.
much going on in this space not to do that. So, if people want to reach out to you, if they've had a near death experience they want to share with you, is there somewhere that people can reach you or do that?
Yeah, so on my website, hypemother.com, it's HYPMTHR. The kids, they took out all the vowels these days, and I was like, yeah, oh, sure, that's cute. So on there, there's a whole near-death experience tracker. There's an email starting to collect folks there. And there's a lot of people who are like, I have a story for you. I have a story for you. So it's the easiest way for me to sort of collect your information. Feel free to do that. If you want to follow me on TikTok, I'm there as Hype Mother as well. And yeah, I'm definitely looking at next year doing some qualitative interviews with folks. I'm looking at trying to figure out what that method will be in the first half of the year and spending time over the summer. And because of, like I said earlier, the type of questions that I might ask, I have a feeling I'm getting people together. I'm just going to say it out there. I
I
don't
would
know when,
agree.
I don't know how, but I have a feeling like this study it might be a little different because I don't need to write 10 papers again in my life to validate something. I love this idea of like you peer reviewed it in public, and I think
Yeah.
I have a lot more of that Aquarius rising energy
I think
for
so. I would agree
doing
with you.
this.
I would agree with you. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us. I appreciate you. Make sure you check back next time for the surprises that come. And remember, nobody gets out alive. Have a great day, everybody.